Hey everybody, Maverick Christian here. In this episode, I'm going to interact with a few questions on the relationship between morality and God, such as the moral argument for God's existence. Part 1, where I got these questions. I got these questions from when Christian apologist Frank Turek was in a live broadcast on Capturing Christianity's channel to answer questions concerning God's existence. I really wish I were on that channel at the time because I think my philosophy background would have been useful there. I have a philosophy degree, but Frank Turek does not. One reason for the broadcast was a kind of fundraiser event for Capturing Christianity. Kevin Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity does this ministry as his full-time job, so he relies on donations just as the church does. I donate every month, partly because it's tax deductible, but also because I really believe in his ministry. He consistently delivers high-quality content, largely due to interacting with real scholars and experts on his channel. For those who don't know, I work 2 jobs and I go to grad school for a master's in philosophy, and that doesn't give me as much time to create videos as often as I would like. Kevin Bertuzzi, on the other hand, is able to put a lot of high-quality videos at the rate he does, largely because it's a full-time job for him. Part 2. Why, as a theist, think that God grounds morality?
I was rereading chapter 4 of Stealing from God today, and I just wanted to get a little bit clearer on what you think the relationship between God and morality is. Okay, so I'm a theist, but I don't think God grounds morality.
I wanted to react to this because I'm a theist and I do believe that God grounds morality. To explain why I think God grounds morality, I'll first define what I mean by morality. Morality has an ought component. For example, an action is morally wrong for someone only if they ought not do it. But we can use words like ought or should in a couple different ways. Some oughts are purely descriptive, as when, if you wanted to do well in school, you ought to study, just means something like, as a matter of practical necessity, you need to study to do well in school. Some oughts prescribe in a way that is not purely descriptive. So someone saying you shouldn't torture infants might be using this type of ought. And this is the sort of ought I'm using in my definition of morality. Namely, that type of ought that does not have only descriptive qualities. Why that's important is that it means that moral property, like moral wrongness, is non-natural. It doesn't exist as solely part of the natural physical world. Moral oughtness is itself non-physical. In addition to being non-natural, morality is supremely authoritative. If morality says you shouldn't be bigoted towards Jews and the government says otherwise, you ought to follow morality. Part of the reason for this is that morality is objective in the sense of holding independently of human opinion. Objective morality is also universally binding. No human being is above the moral law, so to speak. Even if you're a world leader, you still have moral obligations that you're subservient to. With all that in mind, what is objective morality? Well, it's a non-natural component of reality that has these supremely authoritative obligations for us, and we all ought to obey its dictates. What is God? In one conception of him at least, he's a non-natural component of reality that has these supremely authoritative obligations for us, and we all ought to obey its dictates. Now you might guess why I think God grounds morality. If you already believe in both God and objective morality, and you recognize that morality must have some kind of ontological explanation, that is, an explanation for what grounds it and how it is that a non-natural property like moral wrongness exists in reality, grounding morality in God seems like a very straightforward explanation. So long story short, that's why I think God grounds morality. When you think about it, objective morality is already suspiciously godlike, so if you already believe in God, you might as well go all the way, it seems to me. Here's a caller's objection to God grounding moral obligations, and more specifically divine command theory, which in this context is a view that God's commands constitute our moral obligations. For some context, in philosophy, a possible world is a complete description of the way the world is or could have been like. A fact being metaphysically necessary means that it holds in all possible worlds.
If God's commands ground or constitute our moral obligations, but these commands are contingent, like you said, because God could refrain from commanding things that are good, that seems to contradict what we intuitively think the modal status of moral obligations are, namely necessary. So it seems to me that in all possible worlds, if I had the opportunity to prevent 1 million holocausts by twitching my finger, that I'd be obligated to do that. But I think your view commits you to saying that there are some possible worlds in which I would not be obligated to do that, and that seems false.
Divine command theorist isn't necessarily committed to that. One could believe that at least some of God's impositions of moral prohibitions are metaphysically necessary. For example, just as one could believe that there is no possible world in which torturing infants just for fun is morally obligatory, one could, for the same reason, believe that there is no possible world in which God imposes that moral obligation, and thus never makes such a divine command. Just as objective morality has a sort of metaphysically necessary nature of which things are morally right or wrong, God, as objective morality incarnate, also has that nature. At least, that's the way I view God. On a tangent.
You do think that there are some commands that God is that like it's metaphysically necessary for God to give. So it's metaphysically necessary for God to issue the Ten Commandments.
What do you mean by metaphysically necessary? What does that mean, metaphysically necessary? To be fair to Frank Turek, he's not a philosopher. I've never seen him claim to be one. Even so, if you are going to be a professional apologist, you should know this kind of stuff, to have an at least basic understanding of philosophy. Another example.
Yeah, okay. So I can tell you my view. Okay, so I'm a theist, but I think that our moral obligations are constituted by abstract reasons. These are abstract objects, they're metaphysically necessary, causally inert, and God didn't create them, and they're not thoughts in the mind of God. And so the thought would be you're obligated to do something when the weight of your reasons counts in favor of doing it. And I think that moral reasons are just constituted by these abstract objects.
But how does an abstract object obligate you to follow it? Like, for example, let's say the Earth is an abstract object, which it is, right? It's not sentient. I inwardly cringed when I saw that. As someone with a philosophy degree, it's super obvious that the Earth isn't an abstract object. Abstract objects are non-physical entities like numbers, and as the name implies, they have to do with abstractions. Again, to be fair to Frank Turek, he doesn't have a philosophy degree, and so the Earth not being an abstract object wouldn't necessarily be as obviously wrong to him as it is to someone like me. That said, again, in my opinion, if you want to be serious about apologetics to the point of making it a profession, you really should have at least a basic foundation of philosophical knowledge. This is because philosophy is the intellectual discipline that, among other things, studies arguments for and against God's existence. Also, because different branches of philosophy interact to some degree, including philosophy of religion, it's good to have an at least basic general knowledge of philosophy. One very good book I recommend for this is Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. It's basically a college philosophy textbook for Christians, and it's a pretty solid foundation introduction to philosophy, including not just epistemology and metaphysics, but also philosophy of religion topics important to Christianity, like the doctrine of the atonement. If you want to be a serious apologist, I strongly recommend knowing philosophy on at least this basic level. But back to the caller's idea of morality being grounded in abstract objects. Why don't I think this is a better grounding for morality if you're a theist? One reason I think that abstract objects like numbers are more like ideas in the mind and have no more real existence than Sherlock Holmes. One idea, called Platonism, is the idea that abstract objects are entities that have real existence just as people and mountains have real existence, but these abstract objects exist non-physically and independently of the mind. My view is that Platonism is way too metaphysically extravagant and posits more than you need to for explaining reality. I don't think you need to posit numbers as some kind of non-physical entities that have real existence to have mathematical truths like 2 + 2 = 4, for example. Moreover, if you already believe in God, surely the simpler ontological explanation is to ground morality in God. That way, you don't need to posit more entities than necessary to explain morality's existence, since again, you already have God's existence if you're a theist. And there are other problems also. One objection has to do with the problem of getting moral obligations out of abstract objects. Suppose kindness and cruelty both exist as abstract objects. Who would impose the obligation to align myself with one abstract object over another? There still seems to be something missing here. Frank Turek makes a similar objection in the Capturing Christianity video. Here's one objection that Frank Turek didn't raise, however. What does it even mean for a moral value like kindness to have real existence as an abstract object? People can be kind, but how is it in the absence of anybody kindness exists? As a mindless and non-sentient abstract object, kindness itself isn't kind, which sort of suggests that kindness wouldn't exist in the absence of any people, which is problematic if you think kindness is an abstract object that has real existence independently of any person. So we have a bit of a problematic mess here. Plato believed in the form of the good, also known as the good, as a platonic object. But it seems far more intelligible to ground goodness in a person's nature. Kindness as a mere abstract object can't be kind, but a person can be kind. God is perfectly morally good. God is kind, just, loving, and so forth. So God being the form of the good and grounding what is morally good in his perfectly moral nature seems like a much better ontological explanation for moral values like kindness, justice, and so forth. Part 3. Does the moral argument's first premise assume divine command theory? There are many versions of the moral argument, but here's one version. Premise 1. If God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2. Objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion. Therefore, God exists.
So is it right that you defend the moral argument as in if God does not exist, objective morality does not exist. Objective morality does exist, therefore God exists.
Yes. Well, it's a William Lane Craig version, yes.
Yeah. So the first premise is only true if divine command theory is true, or some theory like that. So to defend premise one, I think you have the burden to definitively rule out all of the other options, which include non-reductive non-naturalism and reductive naturalism.
Does the moral argument's premise 1, roughly the idea that if God does not exist, then objective morality does not exist, require that divine command theory is true? The short answer is no. You could argue for premise 1 from some type of divine command theorist perspective, like say God needs to ground moral obligations with divine commands, but that actually isn't necessary to justify for the first premise here. There is a theorem in mathematics and propositional logic that says, given A, probably C entails probably if A then C. I have a blog post proving the theorem if you're curious. Applying that theorem here, we roughly get, given God's non-existence, it is likely that objective morality does not exist. Entails, probably, if God does not exist, then objective morality does not exist. In that case, all you really need to do to justify premise 1 as probably true is to show that objective morality is unlikely given God's non-existence. So what is the need to argue for divine command theory or refute non-theistic alternatives to justify premise 1? Indeed, the idea that given God's non-existence, it is unlikely that objective morality exists is how I argued for premise 1 on Capturing Christianity's channel when I debated the co-founder of former president of Internet Infidels, Jeffrey J. Lauder. Part 4, Conclusion. To summarize 4 points. First, I recommend donating to Capturing Christianity as part of your donations to Christian ministry. Part of the reason I made this video is to draw additional attention to Cameron Bertuzzi's Capturing Christianity. Again, donations are tax deductible and it's a very worthwhile ministry. I work 2 jobs while going to grad school, whereas for Bertuzzi, Capturing Christianity is a full-time job that relies on donations. Second, why should a theist think that God grounds objective morality? To summarize and oversimplify somewhat, objective morality is suspiciously godlike. A non-natural component of reality that has these supremely authoritative obligations for us, and we all ought to obey its dictates. This description fits both God and objective morality. Third, if you want to be a serious apologist, learn basic philosophy. For those who want to be a serious Christian apologist, I recommend Philosophical Foundations for Christian Worldview. Fourth, divine command theory isn't needed for premise 1 of the moral argument. Given God's non-existence, it is unlikely that objective morality exists. Entails, probably, if God does not exist, then objective morality does not exist. As long as you show that objective morality is unlikely given God's non-existence, you've shown the first premise is at least probably true, and you don't need to prove divine command theory or argue against non-theistic grounds for morality. Well, that about wrap it up. This is Maverick Christian inviting you to go in peace, serve the Lord, and love logic. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more videos, hit subscribe and ring the bell.